Hey, Jay, you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, now I can see you. Perfect. Okay, Skype is just a terrible, terrible thing sometimes. It's been really horrible lately. Either way. Okay, so let me just jump into something with you, because outside of Hollywood decodes that you are known for, you've also been talking a lot about some modern Brave New World parallels, which I think are all very, very apt. I dig into that book a lot on this show as well, because for all of the times that people reference 1984, Brave New World is so much more where we are. 1984 is a great guide to how the media works, but in the book, what is it? In the book, failing to take the state-mandated drugs are a crime, as you pointed out. Have you ever done a breakdown of Equilibrium, though, the Christian Bale movie?
It's on our list to do. So my wife and I were actually going through a series on all the dystopian films chronologically in terms of when the movies are set. So we just did RoboCop and The Island and a bunch of those Terminator era. And then now I think Equilibrium will be coming up in the near future. So it's actually one we're going to get to. But yeah, you're absolutely right to liken that to Brave New World, because, in the film, Christian Bale's son, if I recall, is basically a child spy, and he, rats him out for not taking his soma, basically.
Yeah. And in that respect, in that movie, as you'll see, and I can't wait to watch that breakdown, but it's you have to take your daily, because it dulls out your emotions. And that mandate, it really reminded me of Rudolf Steiner. I don't know if you ever looked into Rudolf Steiner. I haven't heard you talk about him, but he would, in the early 20th century, he went on to talk about how drugs eventually, especially in the form of vaccines, would be used to dull out our spirit and kill our connection to the divine. And it really shines through in that film, because it has that kind of Christ-like situation that comes in, the use of color. It's all going to come and slap you in the face, of course, but it's really interesting there. Brave New World, though, I love when you do those breakdowns.
Yeah, thanks. I remember looking at Brave New World really in depth about 5 or 6 years ago. I put it in my book as a pretty significant analysis, and then more recently I've been diving into Tavistock and MK Ultra. And if you look at the life of Huxley, he's kind of doing pre MK Ultra stuff in the UK. And I actually did a really deep dive recently on MK Ultra operations that a lot of people don't know about, what all they were up to in Australia. So I've gone really deep into that. And in terms of drugs, one of the things that I found out was that some of the figures who were doing research, that are pretty well-known figures now, some of whom have even gotten scientific awards, they were doing research off the coast of Australia in Papua New Guinea to isolate prions. And so if you know about, where we are now, prions are a big deal. And so that actually comes out of biowarfare research and MK Ultra, believe it or not.
Yeah, and I have been paying very close attention to all of that. There has been quite a few medical professionals coming out that have talked about this. These certain injections that are being pushed right now, and how they make those prions, those crystals, and what it can do, what it can lead us toward. But I think aside from that, the statistics don't lie about how much prescription medication, especially psychotropic drugs and things like that, anti-anxiety, anti-psychotic, all of it, we gobble up the lion's share of the world's drugs in that respect. So I would say to get people that are already so marinating in this kind of these substances, and then expose them to the kind of nonstop propaganda we have, as well as the base programming that happens in K through 8 schooling. Holy hell, man.
Yeah, the whole system is really engineered to make us into these sort of cogs in the machine, and to root out individuality. In fact, some of the Tavistock studies and MK Ultra studies were all about figuring out ways to rid the individual of individuality. I was reading a psychiatrist's analysis of ritual abuse the other day, and he was noticing that a lot of the people who had undergone ritual abuse that he counseled he noticed that one of the common patterns in the different cults was to break down individuality and turn them into essentially mind-controlled zombies of the cult. Now, typically that was satanic type cults, but it could apply to other, non-satanic cults too. But if we think about it, that's really what the state and society as a whole is doing, or at least the big pharma corporate state, is they want to turn everybody into cult members, basically. And that's what we're seeing now. Everybody's in this kind of like a giant cult. And the more that I look into the history of Tavistock, one of the key figures, for example, was Kurt Lewin. And Kurt Lewin also was an MKUltra doctor. So people don't know that Tavistock, is directly connected to it's basically the British version of MKUltra. And all of those studies in social engineering were all about engineering society as a whole. And a big part of that is, the big pharmaceutical companies. And that's who really gave us, the synthesized forms of all these naturally occurring drugs. And they did all that on purpose. And when they sent their emissaries down to Latin and South America, like Gordon Wasson, to find these different plants and shrooms and whatnot, it was for the purpose of synthesizing them to be a method of social control, and that's where we are today.
Wait, that is as much as Tavistock was involved in too? That's where they were. Yes. I did not know that.
Now, Tavistock was in the UK doing social engineering research, and they actually, their origins were post-traumatic stress studies or shell shock. So after World War I, the Tavistock Clinic is created, and then they get a gigantic grant from the Rockefeller Institute to Foundation to expand into this, quote, clinic, which studies dissociation, depersonalization, everything to like managerial techniques in corporate settings. So they become this master class type of thing in social engineering. And some of the doctors, not everybody, but some of the doctors from Tavistock were MKUltra doctors, like Kurt Lewin.
Yeah, you see, this is the kind of stuff that I love getting the background on, because a lot of them are entities that come up in conversation. Sometimes it's like drinking from a fire hose, as we say. The internet, of course, being the greatest modern tool there is for all kinds of social engineering and these sociological experiments that are going on. But as you are so keen on laying out there, the generations before this connectivity of the internet that we had things like the Frankfurt School coming out of Weimar, Germany, and critical theory that we are now, there's all little mutations of critical theory that we are obviously fighting over right now over here in the 21st century in the U.S. and elsewhere. There's Club of Rome, there's the CFR. Yep. I mean, but one entity that usually slips well below people's radar is the Tavistock Institute, and I caught that great segment that you did not too long ago. And so it's good that, give us a little bit more about the origins there and the contributions to the current predicament. Maybe we can trace that a little bit better.
Sure. So Tavistock begins, as we said, after World War I. They started noticing that soldiers would have these flashback. Everybody thinks about the crazy Vietnam vet walking around their town and don't make a sound too loud, or set off a firework next to the vet because he'll flip out and go into psycho mode. Well, that's because of the idea of shell shock. And when they noticed this after World War I, they said, we need to study this. And then it became a situation where it was, verging into research into multiple personalities, dissociative states, fugue states, et cetera. And that's when they got a grant from Rockefeller Institute, as I said. And it included some pretty famous names connected to Tavistock originally, even people like Carl Jung. They wanted to implement,
wasn't Bernays a part of that? Edward Bernays?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe he did have a connection. Pretty much anybody who was well known in that early phase of, psychology and even the advertising world, exactly like Bernays. They had connections to Tavistock because there's a big overlap between social engineering and psychological warfare operations, because a lot of the people who went into that, were guys who had studied wartime intelligence stuff, and then they would either go into advertising or consulting firms, PR firms, Lipman, or admin. So if you think about Mad Men, the Don Draper character is actually kind of a model of the guy who goes out of who's wartime, he's a soldier guy, and then he moves into being this ad man. And the point there is just that they were taking all these techniques of what's called Weltanschauungskrieg, or worldview warfare, and they're applying it to advertising. And the way it relates to social engineering is that, well, just if you think about it, you're trying to convince people to adopt your ideology. So the same principles behind selling stuff, right, which involves shutting off critical thinking and getting people to just sort of react with their base desires, that's totally useful, right, for both advertising and for social engineering. So again, all these figures who played early key roles, like Bernays, even Kurt Lewin, he also has a connection between Frankfurt School and Tavistock, as well as MKUltra. A lot of these figures I've turned up, end up being really important figures in MKUltra too. So Tavistock has this wartime role of basically doing, as we said, research into psychical states, in terms of mental states, I'm saying, and then it sort of transitions into corporations sort of hiring them to tell them how to best run their corporations. And so Tavistock actually came up with the idea of soft fascism or democratic fascism. And so they figured out ways that they could get people in a corporate setting to totally adopt groupthink. Tavistock pioneered the idea of groupthink, to get individuals to shut off individual thinking, right, to submit to the group. And they even figured out the best ways and motivators to get people to do that. So they, for example, the idea of little tiny pins and awards, or Employee of the Month. That's a Tavistock thing that would get people to fight, each other for some pittance. This week you get, like 10 more points on your Kroger credit card or whatever. But and really it's just a way to control people and adopt groupthink. So those are some key examples of how that stuff is now used, not just in a corporate setting, but now socially, right? The social credit system is really the macrocosm version of that very, Employee of the Month type model.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, my next question was going to be about modernizing this kind of stuff. How did the modernization of these old world think tanks really go? And then as you're speaking, absolutely the group think that's going on in the corporate world is insane. I get emails and text messages from friends of mine who are trying to survive their best in corporate America that are bombarded. They're not even doing they're barely doing work at times, because they're getting bombarded with group identity bonding sessions and guilt and atonement shit. It's ridiculous. And then of course there's this whole idea that you just brought up there with what was that last point you just said? Outside of the group think, there was.
Well, that they could apply those strategies to all of society with social credit. The
social credit. I mean, yeah, are we not?
Groupthink in small settings can be applied on the collective global setting, and that's why Tavistock has been instrumental in promoting not just things like feminism, but also if you are familiar with the white paper Changing Images of Man, that's a Stanford research connected thing, but it's connected. Research was connected to Tavistock studies. So a lot of what Stanford research puts out is very similar to and connected with the research that Tavistock has been putting out. And you see that now because in the last 5 years, what Tavistock is most publicly known for is I'm trying to think of the right code words for our social media settings that we have here, for changing what you identify as. You catch my drift?
Yes.
Tavistock has been instrumental in figuring out the ways to convince people to do those things.
There was a long time rumor that Tavistock was behind a lot of different types of websites too, like fringe message boards that I even like to frequent from time to time. Godlike Productions and other places. It comes and goes, and people said there used to be little footers where it said Tavistock Institute or whatever, and that made sense. The little that I knew about the institute, that's why I wanted to get a lot more background tonight. But it would make sense that the internet, which of course is a military defense project in itself, which we are now a planet of 7 billion people. A huge portion of that planet is now voluntarily spilling every thought that they have, everything that they do, every desire, every commercial inclination. I mean, it is to call it a social experiment is the understatement of our species history. But
well, another thing that you kind of alluded to earlier that Tavis thought was connected to is the idea of selling people on guilt for environmental issues. They were big with, Club of Rome type stuff of getting people to believe that, humans are the problem. If we just have less people, if we have less stuff, if you don't have private property, which we see World Economic Forum now, promoting. Klaus is out there saying, you will own nothing, you will have nothing, you will be happy. You'll basically be a slave of the global elite, and it's Tavistock's job is to sell the idea, right? Oh, the reason that we have natural disasters is because we are, throwing away trash and because we have babies, this kind of crap. Tavistock back in the 70s was coming out with ways to promote that, as well as ideas like veganism. Tavistock was connected with SRI in coming up with white papers to sell veganism back in the late 70s. Literally, they were already figuring out how can we tie veganism and, oh, man is hurting the planet, man kills the animals. And then down the road, we see this stuff rolling out, right? Last year was hailed as the year of the vegan when we saw the Economist magazine, Jay-Z and Beyonce, coming out, we're all vegan, everybody's vegan now. All of that is merely one angle of changing images of man, to get man to see himself as the problem, to see a different, totally reoriented view of nature and of man and his place in the world. And now the idea is austerity. We got to kill everybody off. We got to have great reset. We got to have year zero. We got to start over. We got to have no more consumption. We got too many consumers. Now it's got to be, it's the same idea as the austerity that the banking elite have been selling for the last 10 years.
Oh, yeah. And, in the second half of tonight's show, I wanted to jump into some of the notes I had compiled early last year on Mind War, because I know that you have spent a lot of time on that, yes. And Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino and all that stuff. But, as you were just speaking right there, man as being the problem, that right there is the Mind War working right there, where you are putting out this image through mass media that they control in such a big time way that the victors have already been victorious, that the problem will be extinguished and there's no use in fighting it. But also, as you were talking a little bit about how it was the year of the vegan, well, we've already been told, wow, for everybody being inside for 9 to 10 months, we were able to see the horizon a little bit more. Mountain ranges were not fogged out by the haze of pollution of people out there. The shutdowns.
Now they're going to call for climate lockdowns.
We had a couple of weeks there before they started throwing Bill Gates under the bus with all of the divorce stuff. Yeah. We got fungus burgers. No, obviously they're trying to tell everybody, do not have children. Don't have children because the environment can't take it. So the mental gymnastics and the mental burdens that have been given to people have been, and of course they hyper focus it on white European people, and then they go and they jump up and down and they say, hey, guess what? White people for the first time have not had their population grow in God knows how long. Why could this be happening? You're convincing us to kill ourselves off and eat crickets instead of meat. It's holy hell, man. It's a multi-layered cake.
Like you said that, I just saw that Washington Post article in a stack of old articles literally about an hour ago, and I bumped across that, ran across that about the declining populations of whites in the West. And so that's part of that guilt manipulation that you're bad merely for existing. It's almost like they have an inverted version of the doctrine of original sin, right, from Christianity, where they take it. Now the original sin is that you're a carbon sinner, right? Like you sin by breathing air and oxygen and this kind of stuff, and you're bad from Mother Earth. But the irony is that, as going through a lot of these writings of the global elite, they even admit that that's all made up, right? I mean, the first global revolution by Club of Rome many, many years ago said, we're going to invent a thing, and we invented pollution. That man is the pollutant, man is the problem. And they even say in the document, it's invented, it's made up. Clear as day, right in the paragraph, it says that we have come to use this invention of man being a pollutant. But really, it's ultimately, as you know, Frank, it's an occultic idea too, that if they can reinstitute a kind of a sacrifice and get humans to basically sacrifice themselves, to sterilize themselves, then they think that it will sort of foist the next phase of evolution upon us. So they think that they can be the kind of lab coat priest that will steer evolution into the next phase. And you see this in Bertrand Russell, you see it in Jonas Salk's writings, you see it in H.G. Wells. They literally think that they can take on the reins of evolution and steer it to where they will move into the next phase and everybody else will die off. And I mean, it's just, here we are, people cannot believe it, and it's what we've been talking about for so long is literally rolling out in front of everybody's eyes, but everybody's just gaslit and they can't believe it.
The gaslighting, and I think that's also what protects them karmically. We talk about everything from an occult standpoint, especially when you break it down and stuff there too. One of the telltale old as sin kind of rules there is that need to be, I don't know, be very subtle in your deceit. You gotta. So when you have somebody like or some group like the Club of Rome that in the late 1970s puts that out there. Hey, listen, we were coming up with what could be the next big thing, and who could be the target, the antagonist of this new plot, and this is what we decided. It's public. It's available for anybody to see. If you don't acknowledge it, whose fault is that? You've pretty much invited the vampire into your house. But more people are, well, and not as many as they think, because then 2020 wouldn't have happened. But more people are taken. They're taken aback by the majesty of someone like Greta Thunberg, who comes sailing across the ocean. Like, oh wow, yes, take my tax money, 16-year-old. So,
how dare you? I should be in school.
How dare?
Greta is a human shield, right? So she's like a tool of propaganda. They love to use kids because you can't attack a kid, right? Oh, how mean! Oh, you're so mean. But she's obviously a propaganda creation, right? I mean, it's so absurd that anybody with an IQ over 80 ought to be able to figure it out. And they know that, right? Kids are great tools for wartime propaganda, right? You show a child who's been supposedly killed or dusty from the situation in warfare or whatever. It's classic propaganda, and when you know that, you can recognize it very easily. But yeah, really, this is just about medical tyranny. I won't go too deep into that, but one of the global elite writers that I did cover was Fritjof Capra, and he wrote in his famous book Turning Point, I think, back in like the early 80s, he said that medicine would be the key sort of backdoor angle that the new global elite order could use to basically bring in their plans, right? Because most people just default to their medical expert, especially boomers. Boomers are, I believe whatever my doctor tells me. They could have a doctor who's 500 pounds, totally unhealthy, and they'll listen to this guy for health advice, right? Like, so they'll listen to their doctor. And I mean, the doctor tells them to eat the, Jimmy Carter food pyramid, right? Which is like 12 servings of grains a day. And, you know what I mean? It's like 2 cups of sugar a day minimum. Just absurdity, right? Just things that on the face of it in terms of nutrition make no sense. But these experts, right? These are the health experts. So they conditioned a whole generation of, boomers and their parents to just defer to experts. So get away from critical thinking, get away from you making your own decisions, doing your own research. Just defer to experts. Quigley talks about that. He said that in the next phase of the business plan, the global order, they would bring in a reign of experts to where you would be conditioned to be a bad person if you even question experts. That's by design. And he said back in the 60s that they would have an order in place where you do not question the experts. Right. So it's a new dogma, which is so odd. Right? I thought we were in the world of, free thought and, libertarian, and we were free from the ancient medieval dogmas. No. It's a new dogma. It's a technocratic dogma. You don't question the holy inquisition of the robotic technocrats.
Oh no, no, not at all. And I've done breakdowns on that before. Just from what I know about growing up Catholic, and I know that you have such an affinity for the Catholic Church, but just
well, I don't have a problem with Catholics, but I don't like the papacy as an institution.
Well, either way, just taking what I know about the structure of everything there to see how they have created, as you said, a religion. They have holy days. They have, all of their award shows are pretty much like a religious holidays. Yeah. They've got mantras. They've got martyrs. They've got saints. They've got devils. They have everything you need. Prayers. And now they've got a Eucharist with all these shots. It's really it's really something incredible. But I want to move on to something else before we. It's the last thing I wanted to ask you. This has been such a great conversation, and since we're talking about the psychological warfare programs, and how far back they go, we know that during the Vietnam War there was a lot of work being done on these programs. With Afghanistan now being so close in comparison with Vietnam, from the shady beginnings to obvious drug trade incentives to prolonging the engagement through these paralyzing rules of engagement. And now we have this anticlimactic, somewhat embarrassing end to it all. It's incredible how they match up. You could put a stencil over it. How is Afghanistan's situation reading for you? I know that might be too broad of a question, but you can get as specific as you'd like.
Yeah, well, so I don't know the whole picture. Obviously, I've been, listening to a lot of people's analyses over the past couple of days, and my take would be, if we remember the history, that, it's the gate to Eurasia, so it's a place where empires have always wanted to control that region, not just for their resources and the drug resources that exist there in terms of opium, sure, but also for its strategic location as the gateway to Eurasia, and controlling the Eurasian heartland in terms of geopolitical power structures has always been the key. You have to control that. Brzezinski said, to control the world, you have to control Eurasia, thus the importance of Afghanistan. And of course, Brzezinski was instrumental in setting up the Mujahideen as the base, as the freedom fighters for the CIA during that, latter period of the Cold War, fighting the Soviets. So they had that role as a sort of tool of the global elite, you could say. Back then, I would tend to think that they still have probably to some degree that role as tool. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that because what they did in Afghanistan, that because they basically threw out Americans or whatever, that now that shows that we lost. It's not a battle between Afghanistan and America. It's a bigger power structure that, at least probably since Vietnam and maybe even earlier, the wars aren't meant to be won. If you remember in 1984, this comes up when O'Brien's talking to Winston, and he says, Winston, the wars aren't meant to be won or lost. They're meant to go on. And so I see, at least since Vietnam, and my publisher has a really good take, I think, on Vietnam. His dad was in the OSS and knew all about, the drug lanes and all that. And he said that, Vietnam was not meant to be won. It was really a war that was a psychological operation against the West and against America. So wars can function for many different purposes and many different reasons. And so I think the normie take is like, who won, who lost, like it's a UFC match or something like that. No. Wars have a much greater purpose in terms of military-industrial complex, making money, resources, strategic control, and also the psychological use of and test lab usage of warfare, especially Vietnam. A lot of DARPA technology was actually tested at Vietnam. It was a big experiment, basically. And so what Vietnam did was basically make America look bad. It was a big, huge problem and a psychological attack on Americans, and seeing how many people died and for no reason, it didn't accomplish anything. It was really a morale destroyer, and I think that probably if we were to liken it to something like Vietnam, it's the same type of thing where it's just continual chaos. The wars aren't meant to be won. They're meant to continue for the purpose of constant destruction, rebuilding, destruction, rebuilding, destruction, rebuilding. And it's a it entirely could be, handing the region over to China too. It could be something like that as well. All of those things are possibilities, but I don't think that it's like some victory, against America. It's intended to make America look bad.
I'm with you on that one. I really am. I was, the last couple of days on this show, we've been just picking through it, taking calls, and seeing what everybody's thinking. And as you were talking about with the normie, the very normie take on this is who won and who lost. Another kind of fractal element of that very normie kind of argument is which president is to blame.
Yeah,
for one thing or another.
Right.
Now there are marginal things you can say could have been done better, and maybe one person could have left the region with a little bit more of a smooth kind of a swagger than the other. But eventually, what would have been lasting, and what were we doing for the 20 years that we were there? It's very disconcerting to see everything being hashed out in such a shallow way, because it's obvious here we've seen a business model that has now played out in multiple major engagements over the last few generations. And you think that pattern recognition would get easier for people, and I really do believe it is. You want to end on a high note. What makes you hopeful about where we are right now, and how people are perceiving reality?
I think a lot of people are noticing all the contradictions and the mistakes and the absurdities and the irrationality, and they're waking up. But it's a question of, is it enough, and what do we do? So hopefully we have enough resistance to all the madness to say no to all this stuff that they're trying to foist upon us. And ultimately, I think I do have a religious perspective, so I think that in the end, the good guys win, so to speak. So that's how I would win on a happy note, is that I'm not too worried about the day-to-day news cycle. The day-to-day news cycle itself is kind of a psyop, so to speak, to get you, constantly agitated and upset. Not saying I don't follow the news, but I'm not super concerned about the news cycle, because it really is constructed as a kind of a destabilizing, psyop also. So I'm not too worried about that stuff. And even if things get worse, I think that they'll get better all the sooner.
Well, Jay, it's always awesome to have you on. It really is. Your name and, of course, your website has been on the lower third the whole time. jaysanalysis.com. Tell everybody what your broadcast schedule is like, where they can find you, where they can get your books. Go ahead.
Thanks, dude. Yeah, no, it's always great talking to you, Frank. And I really need you to come on, too. We've talked for a year about, you coming on my channel doing a chat, too. So
we'll do
hopefully we can set that up pretty soon. But you can find me at jaysanalysis.com. I've got a vast archive of 5 years of interviews and lectures. And then you can go to my YouTube channel, obviously Jay Dyer. And then I've been doing a lot of content on a new free speech-based platform called Rockfin. That's pretty good. Frank, you might want to check that out if you haven't heard about Rockfin. I think Chrissy Mayer just came over to Rockfin too.
Cool.
So,
all right,
they're really good company. I'm really happy with them. And then I host, as we said, who's show JONES usually on Thursdays 2 to 3. So you can find my books at the website, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter and all that as well, just under my name.
Tremendous. Thanks again, Jay. It's been awesome to have you on.
Awesome, dude. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back. We have a little bit of an intermission now. Then when we come back, we're going deeper. We're going to just go, we already set up ourselves nicely, then we're going to go just a little bit deeper, and it's